The unexpected encounter. The sky over the remote Martian outpost was a dull red, the horizon fading into the dusty haze that surrounded the small human colony. Captain Sarah Voss stood on the observation deck, staring out at the barren landscape. It had been 5 years since she and her team had arrived on Mars, tasked with establishing a permanent human presence. Life on the red planet was harsh, but they had adapted, creating a small but thriving community. That evening, the alarms blared, shattering the relative calm of the outpost. Sarah's heart raced as she rushed to the command center. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Mark Harris, was already there, his face pale as he pointed to the monitor. "Captain, we've detected an unknown object entering the atmosphere," Mark said, his voice tense. Sarah leaned over the console, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the data. The object was small, no larger than a standard escape pod, and it was heading directly toward the colony. "Prepare for impact," she ordered, her mind racing. "Deploy the emergency drones and get a rescue team ready." As the team scrambled to follow her orders, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. They had encountered no signs of intelligent life since arriving on Mars, but there were always rumors, always whispers of things seen in the distance. Could this be it? Minutes later, the object crashed into the Martian surface, sending a plume of dust into the air. The rescue team, led by Mark, was on the move immediately, their suits equipped with the latest in environmental protection technology. Sarah followed closely behind, her pulse quickening as they approached the crash site. What they found was unlike anything they had expected. The object was indeed a pod, but it was of alien origin, its sleek design and unfamiliar markings unlike any human technology. The hatch was partially open, and inside they found a small, trembling creature, barely the size of a human toddler. The alien was a deep shade of blue, with large, expressive eyes and a fragile-looking body. It appeared terrified, its small limbs clutching at the air as it tried to comprehend its surroundings. Sarah's heart ached at the sight of it. Whatever this creature was, it was clearly in distress. "We need to get back to the outposts," Sarah said, her voice firm. "It's injured and scared. We can't just leave it here." Mark nodded, carefully lifting the alien from the pod. The creature flinched at his touch, but it didn't resist, its fear evident in its wide eyes. Sarah activated her comms, notifying the outpost of their return and requesting immediate medical assistance. As they made their way back, the alien nestled into Mark's arms, its fear slowly giving way to exhaustion. It was as if it knew that these strange beings were its only chance for survival. Back at the outpost, the medical team sprang into action, their advanced scanners and equipment working to stabilize the alien's condition. Sarah watched from the observation room, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. This was a momentous discovery, the first confirmed contact with an extraterrestrial life form. But it was also a fragile, delicate situation. They had no idea what species this alien belonged to, where it had come from, or what dangers it might bring. Days passed, and the alien began to recover, its injuries healing under the careful care of the medical team. It was during this time that Sarah and her team began to form a bond with the creature. They learned that it was intelligent, capable of understanding basic commands and expressing emotions. It seemed to trust them, especially Mark, who had become its primary caretaker. The alien, which they named Lumi after the shimmering glow that sometimes emanated from its skin, quickly became a part of their daily lives. Lumi was curious, exploring the outpost with wide-eyed wonder, often following Mark around like a shadow. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, a silent understanding forming between man and alien. But as Lumi's condition improved, so did the tension in the outpost. Not everyone was comfortable with the alien's presence. Some feared what it represented, the unknown dangers that might come with it. Others were concerned about the implications of harboring an extraterrestrial life form without any knowledge of its origins or the potential consequences. Sarah found herself torn between her duty to protect her team and the deep empathy she felt for Lumi. She couldn't shake the feeling that Lumi was more than just a lost creature. There was something special about the alien, something that drew her to it. As the days turned into weeks, the outpost's sensors picked up a new signal, an incoming transmission from deep space. It was a distress signal, one that matched the frequency of Lumi's pod. Sarah's heart sank. Lumi wasn't just lost, it was being hunted. The pursuit. The discovery of the distress signal sent shockwaves through the Martian outpost. The implications were clear. Lumi's arrival on Mars had not gone unnoticed, and whoever, or whatever, was responsible for the signal was likely on their way to reclaim their lost charge. The atmosphere in the outpost grew tense, with fear and uncertainty gnawing at the edges of the crew's collective mind. Sarah knew they had little time to prepare. The transmission was weak, distorted by the vast distance it had traveled, but it was getting stronger with each passing hour. Whatever was sending it was getting closer. "We need to fortify our defenses," she said during an emergency meeting with her senior staff. "There's no telling what's coming, but we need to be ready for anything." Mark, who had been unusually quiet since the discovery of the signal, finally spoke up. "What if they're not hostile? What if they're just here to take Lumi back?" Sarah met his gaze, her expression somber. "We can't afford to assume that. Lumi is part of our crew now, and we have to protect it. But we'll try to communicate first, to understand their intentions." Over the next few days, the outpost was transformed into a fortress. Automated turrets were set up along the perimeter, and the main compound was reinforced with additional shielding. The crew worked tirelessly, their anxiety palpable, as they prepared for a potential confrontation. Lumi, sensing the change in atmosphere, became increasingly agitated. The once playful and curious alien now clung to Mark, its eyes wide with fear whenever the alarm sounded. It was clear that Lumi knew what was coming, and it was terrified. Mark spent as much time as he could with Lumi, comforting the alien and trying to keep its spirits up. But there was something else in his eyes, something that Sarah couldn't quite place, an emotion that ran deeper than simple concern. She had always admired Mark's dedication and compassion, but now she wondered if there was something more, something he wasn't saying. The day of reckoning came sooner than expected. The outpost's long-range sensors detected an incoming ship, its trajectory locked onto their location. It was massive, dwarfing any human vessel, and its design was unlike anything they had ever seen. The ship's hull was sleek and organic, pulsing with a faint, eerie glow as it descended toward the Martian surface. "Everyone to battle stations," Sarah ordered, her voice calm but firm. "Mark, I want you to stay with Lumi in the safe room. If anything happens, your priority is to keep it safe." Mark hesitated, his eyes flashing with something unspoken, but he nodded. "Understood, Captain." The crew braced themselves as the alien ship landed just outside the outpost's perimeter, the ground trembling beneath its weight. For a moment, there was silence, the air thick with anticipation. Then, without warning, the ship's doors opened, and a group of tall, armored beings emerged. They were clearly of the same species as Lumi, their skin a deep blue, their eyes glowing with an inner light. But these aliens were not here in peace. Their movements were precise and calculated, their weapons drawn as they advanced toward the outpost. Sarah's voice rang out over the comms. "Hold your fire. Let's see if we can communicate with them first." The leader of the aliens stepped forward, raising a hand as if in greeting. Sarah's translator struggled to make sense of the strange language that followed, but it managed to piece together a rudimentary translation. "Return the child," the alien said, its voice resonating with authority. "It does not belong with you." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that returning Lumi would be the safest option for her crew, but something deep inside her rebelled against the idea. Lumi was not just a child. It was part of their family now. She couldn't just hand it over. "We can't do that," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Lumi is under our protection. If you mean it no harm, we can discuss a peaceful resolution." The alien leader's expression darkened. "You misunderstand. The child is not safe with you. We are its guardians, and we must take it back. If you refuse, we will take it by force." Before Sarah could respond, the aliens moved as one, their weapons raised. The first shots rang out, and chaos erupted. The outpost's defenses activated, lasers and projectiles flying in all directions as the battle began. Sarah fought to keep her focus, barking orders as she directed her team. The aliens were highly trained, their movements fluid and coordinated, but the outpost's defenses held strong, at least for now. In the midst of the chaos, Mark and Lumi were huddled together in the safe room. The walls shook with the force of the battle outside, and Lumi trembled in Mark's arms. "It's okay, Lumi," Mark whispered, trying to soothe the frightened alien. "I won't let anything happen to you. We'll get through this together." Lumi's large, luminous eyes locked onto Mark's, and for a moment, it seemed to understand. A soft, shimmering light emanated from its body, casting a gentle glow around the room. Mark had seen this before, usually when Lumi was calm or curious, but this time it was different, stronger, more intense. It was as if Lumi was trying to communicate something more profound. Outside, the battle raged on. The alien invaders were relentless, their advanced technology proving a formidable challenge for the outpost's defenses. Sarah directed her team with precision, but the sheer number of attackers and their superior firepower began to take its toll. The outpost's shields flickered and faltered under the sustained assault, and the once impregnable walls started to buckle. "Captain, we can't hold them off much longer," one of the engineers shouted over the comms. Sarah's mind raced. She needed a plan, something to turn the tide in their favor. "Fall back to the inner defenses," she ordered. "We need to buy more time." As the crew retreated, Sarah's thoughts kept drifting back to Lumi. She had always known that protecting the alien would come with risks, but she hadn't anticipated how much she would come to care for it, or for Mark. The bond he had formed with Lumi was unlike anything she had ever seen, and it was clear that Lumi felt the same way. Could that bond be the key to their survival? Just as the inner defenses were activated, the ground shook violently, nearly throwing Sarah off her feet. The alien ship had unleashed a new wave of attacks, targeting the heart of the outpost. Alarms blared as critical systems began to fail, and Sarah knew they were running out of time. "Mark, do you copy?" Sarah's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm here, Captain," Mark replied, his voice strained. "Get Lumi to the command center. We need to regroup, and I think Lumi might be able to help us." Mark hesitated, glancing down at Lumi, who was now staring intently at him, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. "Understood. We're on our way." As Mark and Lumi made their way through the narrow corridors of the outpost, the walls shuddered with the impact of each explosion outside. Lumi's glow intensified, the light pulsing in rhythm with the distant sounds of battle. Mark could feel the warmth of the light against his skin, a strange sense of calm washing over him, despite the chaos. When they reached the command center, Sarah was waiting, her expression a mix of relief and determination. "Lumi, can you understand me?" she asked, kneeling down to meet the alien's gaze. Lumi blinked, its eyes reflecting the flickering lights of the control panels around them. Slowly, it nodded. Sarah exchanged a glance with Mark, her heart pounding. "Lumi, we need your help. These aliens, they're after you, but we don't want to give you up. Is there anything you can do to stop them? To protect us?" For a moment, Lumi remained still, its glowing eyes searching Sarah's face. Then, with a soft hum, the alien reached out and touched the control panel in front of it. The light from Lumi's body spread across the surface of the panel, merging with the complex circuitry of the outpost's systems. The screens around the command center flickered and then lit up with streams of alien data, incomprehensible to the human eye. Sarah watched in awe as Lumi seemed to interface directly with the outpost's computers, bypassing the security protocols and accessing the mainframe. The lights in the room dimmed, and a soft, melodic tone filled the air, resonating from Lumi itself. Outside, the battle suddenly slowed. The alien attackers hesitated, their coordinated assault faltering as their ship systems began to malfunction. The outpost's sensors detected a sudden drop in the energy output of the alien vessels, their weapons going offline one by one. "What's happening?" Mark asked, his voice filled with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Lumi, it's doing something to their ships," Sarah replied, her eyes wide with realization. "It's protecting us." As Lumi continued its work, the invader's ship emitted a series of distorted signals, as if trying to communicate with the outpost. The leader of the alien attackers appeared on the main screen, its expression one of confusion and desperation. "You do not understand," it said, its voice laced with fear. "The child is dangerous. It must be contained." Sarah shook her head, standing tall. "No. Lumi is trying to save us, to protect us. Whatever you're afraid of, we can handle it. But you will not take Lumi from us." The alien leader's eyes narrowed, but before it could respond, the screen went dark, and a deafening silence filled the room. Lumi's glow began to fade, its energy seemingly spent. The alien slumped to the floor, exhausted but unharmed. The outpost's sensors showed that the alien ships were retreating, their systems compromised by whatever Lumi had done. The battle was over, and the humans had won, not through brute force, but through the bond they had formed with the alien child. Mark rushed to Lumi's side, cradling it gently in his arms. "You did it, Lumi," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved us." Sarah watched them, a sense of profound respect and gratitude swelling in her chest. Lumi had protected them, just as they had protected it. But the question still lingered. What had the aliens meant when they said Lumi was dangerous? And what would happen if they ever found out? The calm before the storm. The days following the battle were a whirlwind of activity. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage to the outpost, while Sarah and her senior officers debriefed and analyzed the events that had transpired. Lumi had become the center of attention, not just for its role in saving them, but also for the unanswered questions it left behind. The alien invaders had retreated, but Sarah knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The warning from their leader echoed in her mind. The child is dangerous. It must be contained. What did that mean? Was Lumi truly a threat, or was it simply a misunderstood being caught in the crossfire of a larger conflict? Mark spent every available moment with Lumi, tending to the alien's needs and helping it recover from the strain of its actions. The bond between them had deepened even further, and it was clear that Lumi trusted Mark implicitly. But there was something more in the way Mark looked at Lumi, something akin to love, a deep protective affection that transcended species. As the repairs neared completion, Sarah called a meeting with her senior staff to discuss their next steps. The command center buzzed with subdued energy as the officers gathered around the central table, their faces lined with fatigue and concern. "We've managed to fend off the first attack," Sarah began, her tone measured. "But we can't assume we're out of danger. The alien forces retreated, but they could return at any moment. We need to be prepared for that." "Captain, with all due respect," Mark interjected, his voice steady but insistent. "I don't believe Lumi is dangerous. It's just a child, lost, scared, and trying to protect itself. We can't just hand it over to those who would do it harm." Sarah nodded, understanding the depth of Mark's conviction. "I agree, Mark. Lumi has shown nothing but loyalty to us, and we owe it our lives. But we can't ignore the possibility that there's more to this situation than we understand." One of the engineers, a grizzled veteran named Jonas, cleared his throat. Captain, if I may, what if the aliens were telling the truth? What if Lumi has some kind of latent power or ability that could pose a threat? We've already seen what it can do with our systems. Who's to say it couldn't do more? Mark stiffened at the implication, but Sarah held up a hand to calm the room. Jonas raises a valid point. We need to consider all possibilities. But until we have concrete evidence that Lumi poses a danger to us, we will continue to protect it. We owe it that much. The room fell silent as the weight of Sarah's words settled over them. The decision had been made, but the uncertainty remained. They were venturing into uncharted territory, with no clear answers and no guarantees. As the meeting adjourned, Mark lingered behind, his eyes troubled. Sarah noticed and approached him, her voice softening. Mark, I can see how much Lumi means to you. I want you to know that I trust your judgment, but we have to be careful. There's still so much we don't know. Mark nodded, his gaze distant. I know, Captain, but Lumi, it's not just another life form to me. I feel like it's my responsibility to protect it, no matter what. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. And you're doing an incredible job, Mark. Just remember that you're not alone in this. We're all in this together. As Mark left the command center, he felt a deep sense of unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something far worse than the battle they had just survived. And at the center of it all was Lumi, the innocent, fragile alien who had captured his heart. That night, as the outpost settled into an uneasy quiet, Mark sat by Lumi's side, watching over the sleeping alien. Its soft glow had returned, a gentle, comforting light that seemed to pulse in time with Mark's heartbeat. He reached out and gently stroked Lumi's head, feeling the warmth beneath his fingers. I promise I'll protect you, Mark whispered, his voice filled with determination. No matter what comes, I won't let anything happen to you. Outside the window, the stars shone brightly, a vast, unyielding expanse of unknown dangers and hidden truths. And somewhere in the darkness, something was watching, waiting for the moment to strike. The following days were tense, with the crew on high alert, constantly monitoring for any sign of the alien invaders' return. Despite the relative calm, an undercurrent of anxiety permeated the outpost. Mark remained by Lumi's side, even as he grappled with his own fears and uncertainties. One evening, as the crew gathered for a much-needed respite in the mess hall, Mark found himself seated next to Sarah. The atmosphere was lighter than it had been in days, with soft laughter and quiet conversation filling the air. Yet Mark's thoughts were elsewhere, fixated on the potential dangers that loomed ahead. You seem miles away, Sarah observed, her tone gentle as she nudged Mark's arm. Mark offered a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Just thinking about what happens next. Sarah studied him for a moment before speaking. I get it. The unknown can be terrifying. But we've faced a lot together, and we've come out stronger each time. It's not just that, Mark admitted, lowering his voice. It's Lumi. I can't help but feel that its future, and ours, are somehow intertwined. Like there's something bigger at play, something we can't even begin to understand. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Lumi's a mystery, that's for sure. But one thing I know for certain is that it cares about you. It's obvious in the way it looks at you, how it responds to you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, and we'll figure it out. Mark appreciated Sarah's words, but the nagging sense of impending doom remained. As the night wore on and the crew slowly dispersed, he found himself wandering the halls, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to change. He ended up in the observation deck, where the vastness of space stretched out before him, a sea of stars twinkling in the darkness. Lumi was there, sitting on a small bench, its glowing eyes reflecting the starry expanse. Mark's heart ached as he approached, seeing the loneliness etched in the alien's posture. Lumi, he called softly, taking a seat beside it. Lumi turned to face him, its light flickering slightly as if sensing Mark's unease. It reached out with one of its slender limbs, resting it on Mark's hand. A wave of warmth spread through him, a wordless connection that spoke of trust, understanding, and something deeper, something that transcended language and species. Mark sighed, leaning back to gaze at the stars. I wish I could understand what you're feeling, what you're thinking. I want to help you, but I'm afraid of what might happen. Lumi's glow brightened, and for a moment, Mark felt a strange sensation, a blending of his thoughts and emotions with Lumi's. It was as if their minds were touching, sharing fragments of each other's experiences. In that fleeting connection, Mark glimpsed flashes of Lumi's past, its homeworld, the chaos of its abduction, the terror of being alone in the universe. Tears welled in Mark's eyes as the connection deepened, revealing Lumi's intense fear of the invaders, the trauma of its capture, and its desperate need for safety and companionship. He also felt Lumi's love for him, pure and untainted by the complexities of human relationships. It was a love born of gratitude, trust, and a deep, unbreakable bond. In return, Lumi sensed Mark's fear for its safety, his growing affection, and the burden of responsibility he felt for its well-being. Lumi also caught glimpses of Mark's past, his struggles, his losses, and the loneliness that had plagued him before they met. The connection faded, leaving them both breathless and overwhelmed. Lumi's light dimmed slightly, and it nestled closer to Mark, seeking comfort in his presence. Mark wrapped an arm around the alien, holding it close as they sat in silence, their bond stronger than ever. As the night wore on, Mark felt a new sense of resolve forming within him. No matter what came next, he would protect Lumi with everything he had. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. But even as he made this vow, the storm that had been brewing finally broke. The final stand. The attack came without warning. The outpost's sensors lit up with activity as the alien invaders returned, their ships emerging from hyperspace with terrifying speed and precision. This time, they weren't just a scouting force. They had brought their full might to bear, determined to retrieve Lumi at any cost. Alarms blared throughout the outpost as Sarah's voice crackled over the comms. All hands, battle stations, the enemy is upon us. Mark's heart pounded as he raced through the corridors, Lumi at his side. The alien was trembling, its glow flickering erratically as fear gripped it. Mark could feel its terror through their bond, and he knew that this time, the stakes were higher than ever. As they reached the command center, the situation was already dire. The alien ships were pounding the outpost's shields with relentless energy blasts, and the defenses were buckling under the pressure. Sarah stood at the helm, barking orders to her crew as they scrambled to hold the line. Mark, get Lumi to the secure room. Sarah shouted over the chaos. We need to protect it at all costs. Mark hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to stay and fight. But he knew Sarah was right. Lumi was the key to everything, and if the invaders captured it, all would be lost. He turned to Lumi, his voice firm but gentle. Come on, Lumi, we have to go. Lumi looked up at him, its eyes wide with fear, but it trusted him completely. As they made their way to the secure room, the ground shook violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. The alien invaders had landed ground troops, and the sounds of battle echoed through the halls. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the outpost, sending a shockwave through the facility. Mark was thrown to the ground, and Lumi tumbled beside him, its light dimming as the impact dazed it. Mark groaned, struggling to his feet. His head was spinning, and his vision was blurry, but he knew they couldn't stay there. He reached out for Lumi, pulling the alien into his arms. We have to keep moving, he urged, his voice hoarse. But as they stumbled forward, the ceiling above them collapsed, blocking their path. Mark cursed under his breath, his mind racing for an alternative route. The sounds of approaching footsteps sent a jolt of fear through him, and he turned to see a squad of alien soldiers emerging from the smoke, their weapons trained on him and Lumi. Stay back, Mark shouted, placing himself between Lumi and the soldiers. He had no weapon, no means of defense, but he would not let them take Lumi without a fight. The lead soldier hesitated, glancing at Lumi before speaking in a guttural language that Mark couldn't understand. The soldier's voice was harsh, filled with urgency, but there was a hint of something else. Desperation, perhaps. Lumi trembled in Mark's arms, its light pulsing weakly as it sensed the danger. Mark tightened his grip, his eyes locked on the soldiers. "I won't let you take it," he growled, his voice low and defiant. The soldiers advanced, and Mark braced himself for the inevitable. But before they could reach him, Lumi suddenly surged with energy. A brilliant light exploded from its body, filling the corridor with a blinding radiance. The soldiers cried out, shielding their eyes as the light intensified. Mark felt a strange sensation wash over him, like a warm breeze on a summer's day. The fear and pain that had gripped him moments ago melted away, replaced by a profound sense of peace. He looked down at Lumi, and for the first time, he understood what the alien invaders had feared. Lumi's light was more than just a glow. It was a manifestation of its power, a power that could heal, protect, and, if necessary, destroy. It was a power that had been dormant until now, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The alien soldiers were forced back by the sheer force of Lumi's energy, their weapons falling from their hands as they retreated in fear. Mark watched in awe as Lumi's light spread outwards, creating a protective barrier around them. With the soldiers in full retreat, Lumi's light began to fade, and the alien collapsed into Mark's arms, exhausted from the effort. Mark held Lumi close, his heart swelling with pride and love. Lumi had saved them again, but at what cost? As the battle raged on outside, Mark knew they had to get to safety. He carefully navigated through the rubble, carrying Lumi to the secure room that Sarah had directed them to earlier. The door slid open, revealing a small, reinforced chamber with medical supplies and emergency rations. Mark gently placed Lumi on a makeshift bed, his eyes filled with concern. "You did it, Lumi," he whispered, stroking the alien's head. "You saved us." Lumi's eyes fluttered open, and it let out a soft, melodic hum, a sound that Mark recognized as gratitude. The alien's light flickered weakly, but there was a sense of calm in its presence, as if it knew the danger had passed. Mark sat by Lumi's side, holding its small hand in his, unwilling to leave. He could still hear the distant sounds of battle, but they seemed far away, muted by the protective walls of the secure room. For what felt like hours, Mark stayed with Lumi, watching over it as it rested. He didn't know what the future held, but he was certain of one thing: he would never leave Lumi's side. They had been through too much together, and their bond was unbreakable. Finally, the sounds of battle began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. Mark's heart raced as he waited, straining to hear any sign of what had happened. Moments later, the door to the secure room slid open, and Sarah appeared, her face streaked with soot and sweat. "It's over," she said, her voice filled with relief. "We drove them off. They won't be coming back." Mark felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank God," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah nodded. "We took some damage, but we'll be fine. Thanks to Lumi." Mark glanced down at the sleeping alien, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "It saved us all," he murmured, his voice filled with gratitude. Sarah approached, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "And you saved Lumi. You two are quite the team." Mark looked up at her, their eyes locking in a moment of shared understanding. He could see the admiration in Sarah's gaze, and it warmed his heart. They had faced impossible odds and come out on top, not just because of Lumi's power, but because of the bond they had formed, a bond that had given them the strength to fight, to survive, and to protect each other. As Mark sat with Lumi, Sarah knelt beside him, her hand resting on his. "We owe you both our lives," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Mark shook his head, his eyes never leaving Lumi's sleeping form. "No, Lumi's the real hero here." Sarah smiled, leaning in closer. "You're both heroes, Mark. And you're more than that. You're family." Mark's heart swelled with emotion at her words, and he felt a tear slip down his cheek. He had lost so much in his life, but in Lumi and the crew, he had found something worth fighting for, something worth living for. As the two of them sat in silence, watching over Lumi, Mark knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more dangers, but they would face them together, as a team, as a family. And no matter what came next, he knew that Lumi would always be by his side, protecting him just as he had protected it. For life.